Appreciate you having us today. I think I'm going to quickly introduce our panelists here and have each of them give a brief perspective. They come from varied backgrounds, and their view on the approach, proper approach, that we might be able to forge from here to get at this problem of youth unemployment. I think those of us who follow economics and financial markets as I do are struck by the fact that we've had so much progress in the last 4 or 6 years since the financial crisis in many respects of containing market panics and getting economies growing again in most of the world, yet the youth unemployment issue has remained rather stubborn, and obviously now is certainly time to try and figure out new methods to get at it. So I will do the introductions quickly. To my immediate left is President José María Aznar of Spain, Jabulane Mabuza, Chairman of Telecom South Africa, Ahmad Alhendawi, of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth Issues, and Dr. Jacob Frenkel. He is Chairman of JP Morgan International and a former Bank of Israel governor. So, President Aznar, if you wouldn't mind just giving, I guess, some opening perspectives on this issue, and I suppose what government leaders ought to be most thinking about, and policies that they may consider to make some progress on the issue.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, for your introduction. Quickly, the youth employment of youth is not a problem of this decade. It's not a problem of this century. It's not a consequences only of the last economic crisis. Decades ago, the rate of youth unemployment is double the general rate of unemployment. And in some countries, for instance, it is not double, it's triple. For instance, Italy, or other countries from Korea, and so on. But we can analyze different causes that provoke a very high level of unemployment. For instance, in my country, that is 45%. I have my experience, but I received a rate of unemployment in 1986 in 24%. But we have the capacity to create almost 6 million new jobs in 8 years. But now the government. But the government, the responsibility of the government is create conditions for the private companies to give opportunities, especially for the young people. This is my first approach of this question. And then, if it's possible, I would like to explain some measures, some decisions that I consider very important in the evolution of the European Union and other countries for this question.
Absolutely, thank you. So Mr. Mabuza, if you would give the businessman's perspective on this for the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think business people like to complicate things using big jargon and concepts like IFRS. In the final analysis, business is about people. People produce, people consume. People sell, people buy. People have aspirations, have yearns, have got fears, have got concerns. If we were to look at the whole issue of youth unemployment in the context of them being producers and consumers, business people don't get up every morning thinking about how many jobs to create. We never do that. And we should start thinking that way, more in the context of the more people we get that are employed, the more they will have the earning abilities and capacity to be in a position to demand the products and the services that we offer. Now, that's the one part. The second part is this problem of unemployment of youth has not occurred because of the current state of world economy. It has occurred because business people and governments, when world economy was growing, did not create the job opportunities. Thirdly, the choices we have made have got political and economic, yielding political and economic results. The choice of technology, as an example, is one that says you move away from labor-intensive to the world of internet, robotics. All those things have not been met with concomitant production of skills of young people that would participate in the knowledge economy, in the green economy, in the infrastructure that the world is requiring. What is it that we deliberately are doing to make sure that our youth? The problem is we have no customers, we've got no labor, we now have a political, socio-political problem looming like we've seen in the northern part of our continent in Africa.
Ahmed, if you wouldn't mind giving the UN's take on things from a global perspective, how do you, as the first person, as you told me, in this position, approach this?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and speak about youth unemployment from the UN perspective. That means to speak about it from 193 governments' perspective, and I'm not sure that exists. There are so many different ways of looking at youth employment, and to speak also about one of the struggles I have with the trying to bring everybody together to talk about youth employment in a strategic way. You know, this blame game has been going on for some time now. Everybody's blaming somebody else. I mean, the business sector is blaming the education, and the education is blaming the employers. Young people are being blamed for not choosing the right thing to study. They are being blamed for not having the right skill set. They are being blamed for not being entrepreneurial enough. They are not taking risk. And this blame game has been going on. And to speak to the defense of young people, I think we have to realize that we can't just blame young people for being unemployed. There's a tendency here, and I ask you all to think about it. Young people are often being described as they are lazy, they have made the wrong choices, they don't have the right skills. That might be true, but it's not entirely their fault as well. At some point in 2008, we thought the youth unemployment is all about economic growth. And we have to make sure that we get economic growth. And that happened, and it's been happening in Europe now. It didn't translate to job opportunities for young people. At some point, we were talking about the need for young people not only to seek jobs, but to invent jobs. And put yourself in the shoes of a young person who wants to open a business now. Access to credit is almost impossible. Laws in many countries around the world is like fighting against all odds. I know in some countries, you will be taxed from day one as a young entrepreneur. We're talking about 75 million young persons who are unemployed today. And in the next 10 years, we need around 600 million jobs. And my take, who can create this number of jobs? Private sector alone, they can't. Governments alone, they can't. Even public-private partnership will not generate that number of jobs. You need to bring the different actors at the national level, and we're trying to do that at the international level, with their bankers, with their governments, with their private sector, and also the education sector. We just adopted the United Nations, we call them the Sustainable Development Goals, and there is a call by member states to have a global strategy for youth employment by 2020. And I think the biggest challenge will face us now is how to facilitate a multi-stakeholder dialogue in a way where we put young people at the center. Not only economic figures, not only to blame them, but to think about them. And for me, trust me, youth unemployment is not about numbers. Youth unemployment is about the psychological damage that is happening for this generation of young people. Who are waking up every morning, they are skilled, they have the knowledge, but every morning they're reminded that they don't have a job and they have no place to go. That is happening in Europe today. It's happening in the Arab region. I come from the Arab region. I come from Jordan. And if you wonder about the troubles in that region, do you know that 1 in every 3 young person is unemployed today? 1 in 3. 2/3 of young girls in the region who are not only want to work, but they are also qualified and they have university degrees are unemployed. And I think we need to shift the the discussion from talking about it in the abstract to talk also about putting young people at the center. I understand so much needs to be done to support young people to be more competent, to seek jobs, to invent jobs, and to be matching the employer's need. But I think we just should not blame them. I think to start with, I will tell you where we come from at the United Nations. We're so much convinced that offering decent jobs for young people start by supporting and investing more. I think probably I should correct myself and not talk only about support, but rather invest, because we should think of job creation as pure investment, not only a charitable thing.
Thank you. Dr. Frenkel, from a macroeconomic perspective, what role do policymakers, what kinds of policies would perhaps set the conditions that might improve youth unemployment and just the performance of these economies in general?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I think that the previous speakers gave enough of a motivation to understand why we are dealing with an important matter. I would like to start, first of all, to put it in context. And what are the magnitudes that we are talking about? First, and I think that the President answer already said, if you look in Europe today, the average European unemployment rate across the continent is about 11%. The average, if you happen to be young, on average, your unemployment rate is 22%. So in other words, we are talking about a problem which is very magnified if you are belonging to the, quote, young group. Second, when we talk about Europe, it sounds like a monolithic group, but it's not. The very same Europe has Greece and Spain in unemployment rate of above 25%, and if you are young, it's close to 50%. And on the other extreme, you have Germany with unemployment rate of 4.5%, and if you are young, you are 7%. So again, we will need, as we talk about solutions, first recognize it's not a single issue, it's a case by case, but we need to understand why is it the case that in Germany unemployment rate is so much lower than in some other countries. And if we get a handle on this, we will make progress. Let me make two more points about this. Number one, if you look at the United States or Europe, it doesn't matter where, the average unemployment rate, say, in the US is 5%. In Europe, 11%. If you are less than high school graduate, then you belong to a group in which the unemployment rate is at least twice as much as the average one. And if you have had college education, your unemployment rate is typically 1/2 of it. So first and foremost, it's the education, it's the skills, it's the ability to change. But we always in policy settings say, but the problem is today, and you give us a solution that is such a long one. So give us a solution for today. So let me tell you the bad news. There is no solution, an immediate one, and don't look for shortcuts. There are assistances for the transition, but we really need to have our compass set to the long term and say, where do we want to end, and then set the direction. Number 3, duration. If you look at the unemployment rate, in the US, 27% who are currently unemployed have already been unemployed for more than 6 months. Now, for this we call a structural issue. The solution for them is different than the solution for the short term. But if you cross the ocean to the place where President Aznar comes from, then in Europe, if you are unemployed, more than 50% of those who are currently unemployed have already been unemployed for more than a year. Another 15% have been unemployed for more than 6 months. Together, 2/3 of the unemployed have been outside of productive activity for more than half a year. Now, that's extraordinary, and this is, therefore, I will say what not to. You wanted me to say what yes in the second round. What not to. It is not short-term macroeconomic policies that will do the job. The issue is structural, The issue is skills. The issue is training. The issue is mobility. The issue is not pumping more money or driving interest rates down or having large budget deficits. They will only create another debt issue that will settle us into the future.
Well, thank you. We actually have a quiz, which if you were listening closely to Dr. Frenkel, you might have gotten a hint as to the answer to this survey question, which you can answer using your iPads. According to the OECD, which country had the highest rate of youth unemployment in 2014? You see the choices, Italy, Greece, South Africa, or Spain. So you're able to answer those questions. And as I mentioned, you may have gotten a hint, so it's a listening test as well as everything else. President Aznar, you mentioned earlier you thought you had felt that part of the job of government, obviously, was to set the conditions under which companies would be willing and have incentives to do more hiring, to, in fact, in part, make progress on this problem on their own. What are some of those how does one set those conditions? And as somebody who was in a position of leadership, what would you be doing now, perhaps?
First of all, I would say that I totally agree with Jacob, with the remarks of Jacob, because it is extremely important. And the situation of youth employment, it is the same in times of crisis and times of prosperity. And but this is different, a different situation in each country and the regions in the area. No? The success in Europe, for instance, contrasts with the situation in other countries, with I reflect. No? But this is a plural situation, a complex situation. No? For me, there are two general rules. First is stability. Instability is the worst enemy for youth people, for organized life, for organized living, for lives, for organized business, for all, put all in expectatives. Stability is fundamental. And second, reforms. Without reforms, especially in education, educational system is a very serious problem everywhere. With the difference between people with high skills and the people without skills. It's different to have a good employee, good job, with a good salary, to live almost in the margins of the system. Well, reforms in taxes, reform in educational system, reform in trade, eliminating barriers and so on is very important. In the case specifically of Europe, that we have a very serious problem about youth unemployment. I outlined 5 questions briefly. 1, to have a real banking union that diminishes financial cost and finish the Eurozone, it is essential for us. Second, create a common energy policy to reducing cost and improving competitiveness in business. Third, to have a deep single market without disadvantage or difference between the countries that become members of the European Union. 4, to promote mobility inside the European Union, not only inside domestic countries, not only inside national market, labor market, inside the European Union, and to promote a great degree of mobility. And finally, to reach an agreement with the US in TTIP, the free trade area, Atlantic free trade area, that must create 2 more million jobs in different countries, and that promote a very clear explosion of free trade and prosperity in a lot of countries. This is, we can resolve all the problems relating with unemployment? No, but we can improve it. And finally, the decisions in government, the decision and the responsibility of leaders is improving things and give opportunities to the people.
Absolutely. Mr. Mabuza, you mentioned earlier, that was very, very interesting to say that if you run a company, you don't wake up in the morning talking about how many jobs you're going to create that day. But what are the ways that companies can see the business value of improving youth hiring, looking for ways to hire more younger people, whether it's, as Dr. Roden was mentioning, certain qualifications that you require that maybe aren't necessary, or doing more job training as opposed to assuming people will have the skills when they come in, or anything else that you think would work?
I think we need to start doing things differently, but the challenge is we now need bigger scale and faster speeds. I think we need to be a bit out of the unusual, out of the box, to start ask questions like, are we as old people capable of thinking what is the solution for young people? It sounds very off the wall. That's the kind of thinking we need. We have consistently institutionalized this thinking in business that we need to get someone who's experienced to get a job. The consequence of that is you've sent kids to school, they've come out of school, you told them, go to school, when you come out of the school, you'll get a job. They come out of the school, they don't get a job. So you lied to them. And you expect kids below them to go to school, looking forward to be unemployed. The problem has become so systematic that maybe one of the things we could do, we have done it in the company I used to work for, it's a small example, is companies should set themselves targets that says at least 30% of all people we employ must be people that have never worked before. Anything else is not job creation. It's just moving one person from one job to another. So we need to start thinking in a manner that is, otherwise these young people must come and run these companies, because we are incapable of thinking in a way that is risky. We use that word in business, it's risky. How can I give this young man the keys to my business? Whereas, we actually don't know, I don't know how to tweet.
I could teach.
But I don't think you can teach me well. We need younger people, because that's the market. So, but seriously, I think we need to start ask ourselves the question whether we as old people, are we capable? Is our concept of our fears of what could go wrong is the one that I think we need to start to challenge.
I mean, you mentioned, you set it up as if there is this kind of blame game that goes on constantly. Does it all truly come down to the education question, as Dr. Frenkel mentioned? Or, in other words, are the things that would help very well known, but we just can't get to them?
I think, all elements are important. Thank you for this. So work on your Twitter skills. But to speak about education in particular, I think that's a question. I want to pick that Twitter example. Our education system currently is not helping young people to go to the labor market. That's true. I remember I studied computer information system in my first degree, and the language we were used for programming, it was outdated by the time I graduated. Here we go. So I have to learn something else. For me, illiteracy in the 21st century is not about not writing or reading. It's about not being able to learn, unlearn, and relearn again. It's part of the process. And lifelong learning is extremely important. The time where a university degree would serve as a permanent residence in the labor market for 40, 50 years is over. You can't go to university for 4 years and work for 40 years after with that knowledge. I usually describe university degree is now merely a visa to the labor market, and then you have to take it from there, and you have to develop your skills. So there's something needs to be done with the education. I remember in my school and many schools, I always asking people about it. All the trainings we get at the university is about how to write a resume, a curriculum vitae. And that CV is like you teaching people basically how to seek jobs, as if there are jobs to be seeked in the first place. In some places there are none. And I don't recall any trainings about writing a business plan, for example. And let's take it from there. If you talk about supporting and finding the right environment for young entrepreneurs to be successful, and I sympathize with government sometimes, with the question of like not being able to generate jobs, this number of jobs. But I always tell governments, and particularly ministers of youth, when I go to visit country and meet with ministers of youth, which I don't know why they put youth and sport, by the way. Many countries, they have ministers of youth and sport. My good friend of the Minister of Youth and ICT in Rwanda, I think that's a good example. We have to couple youth with ICT and other ministries, not with the football and soccer and that. I think we have to think about them and to take them seriously, because this is the point. We have to take them seriously. There are a lot of lip service to young people. We have to take them seriously. Now, if you want to equip them with the skills, then first, you have to ask yourself, do you really offer them the education that teaches them how to think, not what to think? Then, if they transition to start a new business, do you have laws that is supportive for them to grow a business? And the question that is essential for me is access to credit. Leaving many parts of the world is a mission impossible for a young person to get a credit when they are 22 years old with an idea. And for me, a young person doesn't have to be a Tom Cruise to succeed. It's not a mission impossible thing. We should support them. It is a mission impossible in many places. On one hand, there are no jobs to be seeked, and it's impossible for you if you go in the direction of trying to take a risk and start a business. So we have to fix that. My take as the United Nations here, I think you need to enhance the dialogue at the national level. You need national youth employment policies, not only to talk about economic growth, not only to talk about this blame game that goes forever, but to talk about at the national level what we should put there in terms of supporting young people. I think that's what would put young people at the center of that. And by doing that, you have to make sure that young people are sitting at the table as well.
Dr. Frenkel, you promised solutions on the next round. So what are the affirmative things that ought to be done from your approach?
I will tell you, but first I want to make sure that we understand. We do not need to rediscover the wheel. The answers are here, there, but we need to have the courage to pick them up. First fact, the big rise in the unemployment of youth took place in the aftermath of the current, most recent slowdown of growth. 50% of the rise in the unemployment is due to economic growth. The rest is due to labor market conditions, which we can discuss. Furthermore, the youth are much more sensitive to growth than general population. In fact, 3 times as much. One percentage point decline in the rate of growth raises unemployment in general and raises the number of youth unemployment on average 3 times as much. So, without going into microscope, you say we need to find policies that generate economic growth. Once you put it like this, then you have the entire spectrum of economic policies. There is the monetary policy, there is the fiscal policy, and there is the structural policies, those policies which are hardest to do. And they are hardest to do, as any politician will tell you, because they bear fruits only in the more distant future, and we have to pay the cost. We means the politicians in the short term. If you allow me, so because people are tired a little bit, one light remark which is telling something. There was once in France a prime minister called Mendes France. His mission was to make the French consume less alcohol. This was a major, it's not a joke, it's a story. So he instructed, you're too young to realize, I remember it, he instructed that in all the metro stations there were big signs, don't drink alcohol, it will kill you slowly. And somebody wrote underneath the sign a remark saying, that's okay, we are not in a hurry. When it comes to structural policies, we should be in a hurry because that's exactly where we need to start. Let me make one more point about, you mentioned very well the idea of the mindset of individuals, young people who go to school and what are they ready, what are they prepared. And I think indeed we are now into a new era where the issue is not what we teach, but how we teach, not the material that we teach, but the method of operating in a changing environment. And basically, let me say one more word. I was in China a few weeks ago, and I was asked by students in Tsinghua University, can you explain to me why Israel, which is such a small country, has so many patents and so much startup nation story, innovations, and we in China don't have it? I gave them two answers. One was starting as a joke, but I mean it. And the second is more substantive. The joke is because Israelis are less obedient. There is something to it. You know, you go to China, the manager says you have to do this and this, and you do it because you are subordinate. In Israel, you tell your guys, do this and this, they will look at you and say, why should we do it like that? There are better ways to go about it. Now, but this means that the system must be willing to tolerate such questions. There is a saying that says, if you try, you may fail. If you don't try, you have failed. But the society must be such that you tolerate failures, and in fact, you don't call it failures, you call it setbacks. So the notion of moving and encouraging the youth unemployment really to experiment. But the answer, the OECD came up with a very good study of the youth unemployment. The main message there was, important as it is and tempting as it is to deal with each unemployed with a laser treatment, this is not the right way to go about it. You have to create a system of incentives, the system where people have clarity of where the things go, and they will operate. Homo economicus is very powerful mechanism.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I believe we are just about out of time, but I think we want to get the answers to the quiz. Do we have those? I know the answer, I believe, but
what was the quiz?
maybe they showed it. The answer was Spain, and you did get a hint. You had a 50-50 shot if you were listening earlier. But gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate it for all your thoughts. Thank you.